I wanted to talk about surrender in the psychological context and the psychedelic context, and why the ability to surrender kind of equates to health, well-being, or wholeness in life. In studying the psychedelic experience, we gain insight into how our everyday mind works. There's a parallel between what makes a good or therapeutic trip and what makes a psychologically healthy person. Often in the psychedelic experience, when someone's able to surrender, their experience can be characterized by having breakthroughs or insights or learning or experiencing kind of this becoming or wholeness or spiritual experience. Often when there's a lack of surrender, their experience may be fearful or challenging, disturbing, kind of this struggle, this fight, this inner fight. The definition of the word surrender, I feel like there often could be a negative connotation with that. Surrendering, losing a battle, kind of taking advantage of, or death. One of the definitions when I Googled it of surrender that I liked, that I think is accurate in this context, is to abandon oneself entirely. Surrender meaning to abandon oneself entirely. To let go. Let go. What exactly are we letting go of? And it's kind of, I believe it's like we're letting go of a fight or a resistance or an opposing force that stems from within us. Why would we fight? Why do we resist? Why do we oppose? And I think it's to protect ourselves. That the fighting or resistance or opposing is a survival instinct. Survival, the protection is driven from fear or worry or desire or attachment. Survival of the biological being, this is why it's inherent in us to kind of have this fear. Survival of the biological being, and then it seems as if perhaps it's a survival of the ego in itself. We're driven for survival of our biological being. We're also driven to protect our identity, the way we perceive the way ourselves to be and the way the world is, and that kind of gives us a sense of safety by having a secure ego or a secure idea of what's going on or who we are. So in my own psychedelic experience, I feel like I was able to surrender and because of it had this kind of spiritual experience, and I see kind of what I'm trying to discern, like what this all kind of means. It seems that in order to surrender, when a person does surrender in the psychedelic experience, maybe it could be categorized often with a spiritual or mystical experience, a feeling of outside of time or space, or a near-death experience. There's parallels between near-death experience and kind of this ego-death experience. Why do we call it an ego death? It's a letting go of the ego. It's an absence of the ego. And I think my own experience kind of informed me of maybe some of the functions of what the ego is. I think people have a similar experience to the near-death experience on psychedelics because they're surrendering entirely. And often, I imagine when we die, it's the similar thing. You surrender entirely. You're all the survival. If the lack of surrender is this protection or fighting or resistance that is only there sourced from our survival, when we die, we let go of all that survival instinct. We let go of all that worry, all that desire of our idea of self and what the world may be. Surrender has an absence of thought. The ego is kind of this narration of who I am, this sense of I. And it's kind of, there's this constant filter of survival and protection of our biological being and survival and protection of our ego identity, meaning our conceptualization of who we are as an individual and what the world is in itself. If we were to break that, it could mean death, it could mean insanity, it could mean ultimate, kind of this vulnerability. It's like an unconscious function that this thing stays together assembled. in the psychedelic experience, it's almost like there's a safety container to let go of the ego, like the ego could rest, and where all of a sudden there might be this opening up to this other areas of consciousness that often kind of lies behind this constant monkey mind of survival. Surrender. So the lack of surrender might equate to is kind of this fight, this fear, this closing up, this separateness. Surrender could be this kind of lack of fear, an absence of thought, a trust or a faith. In order to surrender, we kind of have to trust in the way the world is, trust in the mystery, trust that we'll be okay, or trust that it is okay to die, or trust that it's okay to let go of worry and fear. The thought is driven by survival or attachment. It leads to worry, desire, questions about the future or the past. When we're able to surrender, it's kind of this non-attachment. I think I'm getting insight to what the Buddhists mean by how attachment is what's, we have to let go of attachment, what they truly mean by that. When we're able to surrender, it's this non-attachment. It's this pureness of being. It's an absence of fear or worry or desire. When we're able to surrender, there's a certain boundlessness or connectivity. There's an absolute presence. There's an absolute feeling of being in the present, and often the thoughts or desires or worries may bring us away from that. When someone's in a bad state of psychological health, it's like they're stuck in the past, or they're so anxious about the future, they can't be here. When we're able to be truly here, we're free. We're able to express artistically. When a child is dancing, when you put on the music, a child just starts dancing, they're free. When we're able to surrender, there's a nourishing wholeness that nourishes us. When we're able to surrender, there's a certain resonance with the soul that helps us become. So that's kind of what I see there to be, when we're unable to do that. It's not that we need to be in that state all the time, but when we're unable to do that, it could bring us to a place of entirety, attachment with the ego that doesn't necessarily reach to that nourishing part of the soul that's this connectivity, this boundlessness, this openness beyond what we know, beyond our perception, beyond thought. There's this nourishing factor that sustains, that's this source of a power of energy that's kind of beyond the function of thought that often is all we're kind of aware of. When we're able to surrender and let in, it can provide this psychological freedom that is beautiful and part of what makes life worth living.